After a very warm couple of days, it is now time to sit by the fire because I'm recording this on Monday night and it is freezing in this house. So, have some nice warm fire, and I'll likely have a dog in my lap before this is over. We're going to start tonight's reading on page 135. Page 135 in Moon Over Manifest, Under the Stars, June 12th, 1936. I'd told and retold Miss Sadie's last story and what I'd learned from Hattie Mae's News Auxiliary to Letty and Ruth Ann. I'd told them all about the Manchurian fire thrower, the untimely demise of Junior Haskell, the explosion at the water tower, and the unfortunate dousing of the Victory quilt. I tried to remember every detail, even down to the Hungarian women's not being allowed to contribute to Quilt Square. But there were still things that needed pondering. So the Hungarian woman was Miss Sadie? Letty's words broke the stillness of the dark woods. So why does she call herself the Hungarian woman? Why doesn't she just say me or call herself Miss Sadie? Because remember, Miss Sadie is the one telling these stories. Why does she refer to herself as the Hungarian woman? When she tells the stories, she's sort of removed from them. She's the storyteller. Oh, Ruth Ann said. But how does she know certain things that happened when she wasn't there to see for herself? I wondered about that too, I answered. But remember the Hungarian olives? Jinx had ducked into her tent at the fairgrounds and later he was doing fence work for her. That must have been how she knows some of the things she knows. He had to have told her. Well, she's got to have some kind of hoodoo. After all, the curse on Mrs. Larkin and the quilt worked, Letty said. Letty still got excited, even though she and Ruth Ann had made me tell them the story umpteen times in the past week. And we'd all read Ned's letters so many times we practically knew them by heart. It was always interesting when Miss Sadie's stories overlapped with something in Ned's letters. Letty marveled at various parts of the story as Ruth Ann and I walked alongside, our feet crunching through twigs and leaves in the moonlight. I was on another one of Miss Sadie's nature errands. She had me do all manner of divining, as she called it. Things like venturing out at dusk to collect blue moss from under a fallen sycamore tree, and getting up at sunrise to gather a handful of dandelions before the morning dew burned off. The tasks were always unusual, and she'd mash whatever I'd brought back into a paste or powder. To what end, I didn't know, but that night was a bit more mysterious, and I wasn't sure exactly what I was looking for. Miss Sadie said a good diviner needed to watch and listen and wait. What do you think the curse was? Letty continued. I mean, what curse causes a water tower to explode? Truth was, I'd been afraid to ask Miss Sadie about the curse she'd placed on Mrs. Larkin. The words seemed so ancient and full of bad omen. I didn't want her saying them in English and accidentally directing them toward me. And I still didn't understand why Shady was bidding against Jinx for the quilt, Letty said. Ruth Ann rolled her eyes. How you ever got a better grade than me in math, I'll never know. Now listen and I'll explain it again. Ruth Ann always spoke about the stories as if she had witnessed the events herself. At the auction, nobody wanted the quilt because it got wet and the president's signature was all smudged, right? Right, Letty said, concentrating. But Shady knew that Jinx had made a bundle of money selling his homemade fireworks. Right, his share was $25.75. Right, since it was Jinx's fireworks that caused the water tower to burst all over the place, Shady wanted him to make restitution or repayment and made him buy it. Jinx probably started with a lowball bid. but Shady kept bidding against him until the quilt finally sold to Jinx for $25. 75 cents! Letty's eyes lit up. The same amount he had made off the fireworks. Yes, Ruth Ann said with a sigh, but it was probably Miss Sadie's curse that doomed the quilt in the first place, don't you think, Abilene? She didn't wait for me to answer. She must be a witch. Even Mrs. Larkin called her a sorceress, a caster of spells. Then why does she call herself a diviner, I asked. How come her sign doesn't say, Miss Sadie, sorceress and caster of spells? Because people in her line of work like to be mysterious, just like whatever it is we're traipsing through the woods for in the dark right now. There's a mystery. Ruth Ann looked at me for an explanation. Miss Sadie gave me this bucket and told me to find a young cottonwood tree in the moonlight. But what's the bucket for? She said to just keep my eyes open. What kind of crazy instructions are those? Ruth Ann grumbled. It is kind of adventurous, though, said Letty. It's like that song, Riding the Rails in the Moonlight Night. Unbidden, Letty broke into song. I lit out on a dark and dreary night. Life had dealt me a heavy blow. First my boss gave me the knee, then it up and rained on me, and I had no earthly place to go. Yodel-lay-hee, yodel-lay-hee, yodel-lay-hee. For the love of Pete, Letty, if you don't sing something a little more cheerful, Abilene and me are going to throw you on a train and not wave goodbye. Don't worry, it gets better, Letty said reassuringly. My soul and my shoes were all wore through, no money or job in sight. But once I hit the tracks, my burden's at my back. I hopped that train in the pale moonlight. I couldn't help but join in. Yodel-lay-hee, yodel-lay-hee, yodel-lay-hee. So what kind of mood is created by that song? That was part of your assignment last week, was to discuss with me the different kinds of moods that different passages brought on. How does it make you feel? Well, that's definitely not an uplifting mood. That would be a very sad, depressed mood. We reached a clearing at the creek bed and studied the rocky, parched ground, and I imagined a time when this had been a lively stream that one could wade in for a swim. There's cottonwoods all along here, Ruth Ann said. I touched the rough, heavy bark. They look too old. She said a young cottonwood. And then let's look for some volunteers that have sprouted up more recently. Besides, the moon isn't very bright yet. Come on, I'm getting hungry. She steered us toward a clearing in a grove of cottonwoods and elms, some not much bigger than saplings. Ruth Ann sat down, her back against a rotted tree trunk, and opened a knapsack. I guess if we have to wait for the eye of newt and heart of toad to present themselves, we might as well get comfortable. What'd you bring? We had agreed that we would each bring some food to share during our outing. Ruth Ann pulled out 3 liverwurst sandwiches. I produced a dusty jar of pickled beets I'd found in Shady's pantry. They would have been out of the running next to the liverwurst sandwiches, but then Letty produced a tin with 2 cookies in it. She handed one to me and one to Ruth Ann. Ginger snap, I said, biting into one, its sweet spiciness giving me a thrill. Where's yours? Already had my fill. It was my sister Susie's birthday on Tuesday, and as a surprise, we all agreed to go without eggs for breakfast this week, so Mama could exchange them for sugar at the grocer's. Letty explained. She made a dozen ginger snaps. Okay, I highly doubt that many of us, if any of us, have ever had to make that kind of decision. What we're experiencing in life right now might be the closest we've ever come to it. But having to say, I'll forego or I'll give up having eggs so Mom can trade the eggs for sugar, to make 12 ginger snaps for her sister's birthday. That's a whole different level of poverty and desperation, even than what we're going through today. I mean, there are times when I have to decide, oh, gee, we only have a little milk left, and I don't want to go to the grocery store in the middle of the pandemic just to get milk. I'll have something different instead and save the milk for something I need it for later on today. But then as soon as I need 3 or 4 or 5 things, then I go to the grocery store. But imagine a time where things are so hard to come by and money is so incredibly tight that in order for your sister to have any kind of treat for her birthday, you have to say, yeah, I'll give up my eggs for breakfast so that she can have that. I mean, Grayson thought it was bad that I had to make him a cake for his birthday rather than buy one at the bakery or at the supermarket. But this is a whole different level. And so it helps me to appreciate, even though things are difficult right now, it helps me to appreciate the things I do still have and the comforts I do still have compared to these girls. Here, have half of mine, I offered. Letty took the half with some reluctance, I thought. Ruth Ann took one bite of her cookie and then another. Your mama sure makes a fine ginger snap. My mama always says she was born to manhandle a cast iron skillet, but your mama was blessed with a lighter touch of a baker. Ruth Ann ate the last of the cookie. Sing us a song, Letty. Letty beamed. I lit out on a dark and dreary night. We were in no hurry since Letty and Ruth Ann had gotten permission to spend the night with me at Shady's place. I hadn't been sure if they'd be allowed to stay over, what with Shady being, well, Shady. But it seemed their mothers had known Shady their whole lives, and they said it was fine as long as we could stomach burnt biscuits in the morning. They know Shady pretty well, it sounds like. Letty's songs lulled us for a time. Then all grew still. We talked so much about Ned's letters and who the Rattler might be, it seemed like a good time to set our minds on other things. How's your story coming, Abilene? Letty asked, the one Sister Redempta assigned you. I don't know. I don't really have a story to tell. Telling a story ain't hard, Letty said. All you need is a beginning, middle, and end. I answered, wondering if it was that simple. It's so quiet out here, Letty said, changing the subject. I listen for sounds of birds or cicadas or rattlers, both the rattly spy kind and the slithery snake kind. Do you think maybe there are snakes in these woods? I asked. Snakes? Ruth Ann pondered the notion. Uncle Louver says there's critters of all shapes and sizes out here. He tells quite the tale about goings-on in the woods. I wasn't really up for hearing it, but judging by the way she stretched back and put her hands behind her head, I knew she was waiting to be asked. Maybe now's not the best time for that story, Ruth Ann, Letty said. It's kind of spooky out here. Go on, I said, pretending to stifle a yawn. Let's hear it. Ruth Ann looked sideways at me, I guess gauging if my level of enthusiasm deserved her tale. Well, she began, he was setting some traps, Uncle Louver that is, when he hears a god-awful noise. He thinks it's a raccoon or maybe a possum, so he goes to check it out. By the time he realizes it's no critter, it's too late. Too late, Letty echoed. Ruth Ann leaned forward. He sees a man looking all afraid at something, his face all pale and eyes wide. That man was petrified. Petrified, Letty said. What, I asked, my interest on the rise. A ghost. A big black ghost floating and rattling right towards the man. The fella's backing up. Then Uncle Louver hears one of his traps snap. Ruth Ann clapped her hands together, and things get quiet. What'd he do? I asked. Uncle Louver, I mean. He ran away fast as he could. Mama says Uncle Louver always was a bit skittish, Letty added. Who was it who was caught in the trap? That's just it. Ruth Ann leaned back again, leaving a sufficient pause for the night sounds of the forest to fill in. Never was a body found. He brought his brothers back to find it, and there sat the trap, still snapped shut. All that was left was an old boot. That's right, an old beat-up boot, Letty said. Then both girls said together, and the foot was still in it. I wasn't sure if they were fooling, but right then in the darkness of those same woods, that image hung before me like the ghost itself. So the boot, the foot, what'd they do with them, I asked. Ruth Ann continued, Uncle Louver wanted nothing to do with it in case the ghost came looking for it, so he buried it. Did anyone ever see the ghost again? Oh, some would see a passing shadow now and again, but they could hear it rattling around in the woods. Rattling, I said. What if the ghost and the rattler were one and the same? I suppose that's a thought. Ruth Ann considered the possibility. Uncle Louver says that sometimes even now he catches a shadowy glimpse of that figure going hither and yon, especially during a full moon. And as she said it, we realized the moon was full and brilliant above us. Look, I said. What? Did you find the eye of newt and heart of toad? Ruth Ann asked. Close. I pointed. Glistening in the soft ground around the saplings were hundreds of big fleshy worms. Miss Sadie knew we'd find worms here for the garden, or for her witch's brew. Either way, let's put them in the bucket, then we can get out of these creepy woods. We worked quickly, scooping up handfuls of dirt before the worms could wiggle their way deep into the ground. Then with two of us at a time sharing the weight of the bucket, we started back to Shady's place, looking hither and yon, here and there, for any ghostly movement. All three of us crawled into bed, one beside the other, listening to the sound of a harmonica in the distance. It was probably just a folk tune being played, but after Ruth Ann's story, it sounded like a mournful wail. When Letty and Ruth Ann were quiet, I reached for the not-so-shiny Liberty Head silver dollar in my windowsill collection of mementos. I tilted it slightly to catch the glimmer of moonlight. It no longer surprised me to find connections between the articles in the box and Miss Sadie's story. Still, some things were a mystery. I thought of our stash of worms outside. The life churning in the bucket was a mystery. How did Miss Sadie know things like where to find worms in the moonlight? What happened to the man who lost his foot in Uncle Louver's trap? Who or what was haunting the woods? Was it the rattler? I put the silver dollar back in its place beside the Wiggle King lure. These many questions swarmed in my head, leaving me restless and uneasy. But it was the look on Letty's face that night in the growing moonlight that made me wonder the most. The way she'd beamed when Ruth Ann had asked her to sing us a song. I thought I knew a thing or two about people. I even had my list of universals. But I wondered, maybe the world wasn't made of universals that could be summed up in a neat little package. Maybe there were just people who were tired and hurt and lonely and kind in their own way, in their own time. Once again, I felt off balance, as if I was playing tug of war and the person I was tugging against let go. Letty, half asleep, sang, once I hit the tracks, my burden at my back, I hopped the train in the pale moonlight. I admired how Ruth Ann knew what I did not, that Letty hadn't had her fill of ginger snaps. With 6 kids in her family, she'd more than likely given up her own cookie and traded something for an extra one to share with us. The moonlight shone on the silver dollar, and I thought of Miss Sadie's story of Jinx and Ned, of Uncle Louver's ghost story, of Letty's story about having had her fill, of Ned's letters and Hattie Mae's news auxiliaries that I read like bedtime stories, and of Gideon's story I was struggling to learn. If there is such a thing as a universal, and I wasn't ready to throw all of mine out the window, it's that there's power in a story. And if someone pays you such a kindness as to make up a tale so you'll enjoy a ginger snap, you go along with that story and you enjoy every last bite. Yodel-lahey, yodel-lahey, yodel-lahey. Private Ned Gillen, Camp Funston, Kansas, March 14th, 1918. Dear Jinx, thanks for your letter. Shipping out soon. Troops already over there will be whooping and hollering to see us replacements show up. Heck Holler and me are in the same regiment. Guess they figured the Manifest Championship track team should stay together. Soon as we send old Hein back to Germany, the other guys from the Manifest High class of 18 plan to meet up at the Eiffel Tower with us to drink a toast. Tell Pearl Ann and the other girls not to be jealous of the mademoiselles. Their bonny boys in uniform will be home in time to take them to the homecoming dance in the fall. And tell Velma T thanks for the relief parcels she sent. There's some kind of bug going around that's waylaid half the camp with aches, fever, and chills. Started a few days ago when one guy reported to the infirmary before breakfast. And today there are 500 in makeshift beds all over the place. I've been taking an assortment of Velma T's home remedies. After my umpteenth trip to the latrine, I figured most of her elixirs are laxatives, but so far I'm holding up better than most. All for now. Next time you hear from me, it'll be on some of that fancy perfume paper from over there. Remember, he's not supposed to say where he's going. I can't say the German part here, but ich habe wunderlich Pfoten. I have stinky feet, Ned. P.S. We told Heck that means put down your weapons. So if he comes face to face with Germans and he says what he thinks is put down your weapons, he's really saying, I have stinky feet. Now, what illness do you think is going around in 1918 that has waylaid a large portion of their troops? So think on that. Maybe do a little research to figure out what was a pandemic in 1918. And we'll talk about that when we come together again. Hattie Mae's News Auxiliary, May 30th, 1918. The recent commencement ceremony for the senior class of 1918 was a momentous occasion and certainly brought back fond memories of my own graduation last year. However, by all accounts, this year's event was bittersweet as some of the class members were not present. You all recall the recent Bon Voyage celebration for the Army recruits for the Manifest class of 1918. It was a moving event as we said goodbye, though only for a time, to our brave lads. I thought it fitting to name them here along with some of their activities. Luther Heck Carlson. So he does have another name. Track and Field Glee Club. Okay, Glee Club. That would be a fun one to do some research on. A singing club. Ivan Holler Carlson, Track and Field and the class treasurer. Lance Devlin, Track and Field and football. Ned Gillen, Track and Field and in the senior play. Douglas Hamilton, booster staff. Having bid a fond farewell to our boys in arms, now it is time for all good men to come to the aid of their country. That means you, ladies, the daughters of the American Revolution, will be sponsoring a blanket drive, a bake sale, a letter writing campaign, and much more. Thanks to Pearl Ann Larkin for organizing the effort before she heads off to college. Miss Velma T. Harkrader was going to enlist the aid of her chemistry class in mixing up some of her good for what ails you elixir. It seems the need is great at Camp Funston as many of the soldiers are still battling the flu. There's a hint. Unfortunately, she is having to produce her elixir at home due to another freak mishap, which resulted in her classroom windows being blown out. But thanks to everyone for your support. And for those of you who requested a printing of the special send-off cheer, it is as follows. Off to war and don't be late. Here come the boys of 1918. Special thanks to Margaret Evans, Senior Class President, for writing the class cheer, which I've adapted here. Permission granted for printing. For all the who's, what's, whys, whens, and wheres, both here and abroad, refer to the Manifest Herald. We've got sources we don't even know about. Hattie Mae Harper, reporter about town. Old St. Jack's lumbago liniment. Don't moan about the ache in your back, rub it out with Old St. Jack. Back hurt you, can't straighten up without feeling sudden pain, sharp aches, and twinges? That's lumbago or sciatica, or maybe you're just getting old. But whatever the case, Old St. Jack's is the liniment for you. We have just have the little missus rub the ointment on your back and blessed relief will come your way. The ointment leaves a slight discoloration on the skin, but this gives a hearty glow, and it can be used on the face as well. Well, I can't imagine any of the ointment you put on for a sore back going on your face. Don't wait, get your trial bottle of Old St. Jack's at your local hardware store. Next to the varnish. Ooh, that's what I want to put on my back. Okay, we're going to go ahead and read Miss Sadie's Divining Parlor. It's just 4 pages. June 13th, 1936. The next day was hot. I wasn't sure those worms were going to be happy with their new place, but they wiggled their way into the dry dirt like it was home, sweet home. I figured they'd have to go down so deep to reach water that they'd come up on the other side of the world. Miss Sadie seemed in a dark mood that morning. Today you make rows, not too deep, not too wide, dig. Her leg was red and swollen, so even her rocking on the back porch made her grit her teeth, and her bark made me grit mine. Still, I'd been working up the nerve to ask her what the curse she had laid on Miss Larkin was. The one that had left the county appraiser's wife in a tizzy. Letty and Ruth Ann weren't going to let it go until I found out. Ma'am, I stuttered, not sure if she'd mind my having figured out she was the Hungarian woman in the story. Miss Sadie kept rocking. That curse you popped on Miss Larkin? Curse, huh, she scoffed. You believe everything that is told to you, curses, spies. I jumped at her mention of spies. How did she know about that? I'd never even mentioned the Rattler to her. She might not have a beat on the future, but Miss Sadie surely had second sight when it came to the present. The only curse that woman bore was her own ignorance, Miss Sadie huffed. Well, what exactly did you say to her? Ave graz budel noche mole. I cringed as she repeated the phrase. It is gypsy. It means, may your life be as long as the hair on your chin. And if you do not get busy, I will put an equally devastating curse on you. I couldn't help grinning as I took up a shovel, digging a square of dirt, then pitching it to the side. I hope Miss Sadie's mood had lightened. It hadn't. No, she scolded. You shovel like a disno, a pig. You cannot toss the ground aside like an old rag. Then it will not help you later. Use a hoe there by the shed. What kind of demon woman is she? I wondered as I gripped the hoe, scooping the dirt to one side and then the other, making a gully in the middle. That made me a bit cantankerous, because crazy as she was, I could see the sense in making a neat row of ground piled on each side to keep the moisture from running off, if the rain ever came. But time wore on and the dirt mingled with the sweat on my body. I felt strangely comforted by the chunk, chunk, chunk of the hoe digging into the ground. I let the rhythm of it take me back to many a dusty ride in a freight car with Gideon. The two of us listening to the chunk, chunk, chunk of the track joints, lost in our own thoughts. I continued with my list of what I thought I knew about Gideon. He could start a campfire quicker than most. He always let out a contented breath after a first sip of coffee, and he liked to flip flapjacks high into the air. My ear is burning from the fire. I smiled at the thought, but a worried frown took over as I wondered what Gideon was doing right then. Maybe unloading 24-pound sacks of flour from a boxcar? What if he'd been let go from his railroad job? Was he sidling his way into a diner offering to work for food? He'd know that a man behind the cash box would turn him down, but on a good day, a man eating at the counter might buy him a sandwich and a cup of coffee. It always helped to have a little girl in tow. He needed me. Or so I thought. What had changed? If there was ever a part of Gideon's life that needed divining, it was this. Why had he sent me away? As Miss Sadie liked to say, I'd have to dig deeper. It had only been a scratch on my leg the day Gideon had started turning in on himself. It was April 12th, I remembered, because it was Easter, and the day after my 12th birthday, just 2 months earlier. We were in Shreveport, Louisiana. The Shreveport Gospel Mission Church was having an Easter supper for anyone who would come and listen to the preacher's sermon. The way he went on for 2 hours about sitting down to the Lord's great banquet and eating manna from heaven, we had our hopes set a little on the high side. So when they ran us through the chow line for a bowl of watery onion soup and stale bread, it was a disappointment. One weathered old hobo told the preacher that if he wanted more pilgrims on the road to heaven, they should pave it with pork and beans instead of onion soup. That night, we hopped the Southern, bound for St. Louis. We were both in a mood, hungry and tired. I sat with my legs dangling out of the boxcar, catching a breeze, when a tree branch caught me on the leg. It nearly flung me from the car, but I managed to stay on. Still, it gave me a good gash on the leg, and we had to find a doctor. Chunking up the dirt in Miss Sadie's yard, I could feel it grinding into the scar above my knee. The infection and fever had lasted 3 days. I didn't remember much other than frightful dreams and sweating clear through my nightgown and sheets, and Gideon's worried face beside my bed. When I finally came out of it, he looked at me like I was a different person from the little girl he'd known before. He kept saying I was growing up, I was becoming a young lady, and other nonsense. I told him I hadn't seen the branch coming and it was just a scratch, but I guess he figured it would be easier traveling without me along to get into trouble. He thinks it is his fault, Miss Sadie said in her out-of-the-blue way. The hoe nearly struck my foot. Why would he think that? I asked, not even bothering to wonder how Miss Sadie could know the thoughts swimming in my head. To see Ned get on the train and leave Manifest and the people who love him. Jinx thinks it is his fault. Oh, I said, yeah, I suppose it was Jinx's fireworks that got Ned the $25 he used to bribe the recruitment officer into letting him enlist underage, but Ned's the one who was anxious to leave. When there is suffering, we look for a reason. The reason is easiest found within oneself. Miss Sadie held up her hand, shielding herself from the dark light of day. I thought of Jinx saying goodbye to Ned at the train station, watching him until he was out of sight, then watching some more, wondering why one had to leave while the other stayed behind. For some reason, my face flushed, and it wasn't from the heat. So let me guess, Jinx skipped town. He ran away. Isn't that what people do when things get tough? They move on to the next town and leave all their troubles behind and everyone they care about. My words came out in such a rush, I wasn't sure if I was talking about Gideon or Jinx. You speak of a town of immigrants, people who already left behind everything, Miss Sadie spat. Yes, there's plenty of blame to go around, and much of it ended up in Manifest. Her words trailed off and she fixed her stare ahead. Somehow, I felt we weren't talking about Gideon or Jinx anymore, but about Miss Sadie. It was in that moment when I saw the weight of age and pain weighing down on her, every creak of the rocking chair sounding as if it was coming from her very bones, that I had a revelation. As much as I had a need to hear her story, she had a need to tell it. It was as if the story was the only balm that provided any comfort. So what happened after Ned left? Miss Sadie drew a breath and seemed to hold it forever. Finally, she exhaled and her breath carried the words. After Ned left, the troubles we had all run away from came and found us.